Executive Director. I am the Executive Director for Hillel of Silicon Valley. Our mission is to inspire Jewish college students to engage in Jewish life and to connect to Israel even after they graduate from college. But in today's hostile environment on most college campuses, Jewish students are shying away from identifying as Jews for fear of being bullied or ostracized. More and more Jewish students are being marginalized on campuses worldwide. We serve 5 campuses, 3 community colleges, De Anza, Foothill, and West Valley, a private Jesuit school, Santa Clara University, and a public university, San Jose State University. Currently, our students are experiencing overt anti-Semitism at all but West Valley College. And in addition, our students are overwhelmed by social media disturbing posts. We want our students to stand up as proud Jews, but for that to happen, they need to feel welcomed and safe at their campuses. Compounding the challenge of responding to manipulative, hateful campaigns against Israel and the Jewish people is the decreasing knowledge about anti-Semitism. A study published in September 2020 revealed that nearly 2/3 of US young adults are unaware that 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. According to the study, millennial and Gen Z adults aged 18 to 39 in America lack awareness of key historical facts. Karen, are you able to put the slide? Okay. 63% of respondents did not know, oh, there you go, that 6 million Jews were murdered during the Holocaust, 59% of those in California. And more than one in 3, 36% thought that 2 million or fewer had been killed. 48% could not name a single concentration camp or ghetto established during the Second World War. 23% said that they believed the Holocaust was a myth, been exaggerated, or that they weren't sure. And actually, I've heard this from students at one of our campuses. 13% of youth in California believe that Jews caused the Holocaust, 11% nationwide, and 12% said that they had definitely not heard or didn't think they had heard about the Holocaust. So as you can see, the lack of knowledge, it's a very dangerous fertile ground for increase in anti-Semitism. And we know that those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. This is why a key strategy for our Hillel this year has been to increase our efforts to educate our campus communities about anti-Semitism. A key strategy is to ask our schools to adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, or IHRA. Today, you will hear from 3 distinguished experts about IHRA and from some of our student leaders about their experiences in presenting IHRA at their schools. Now, I would like to introduce Carrie Zeidman, our board president, who will introduce Mark Goldfeder.
Thank you, Sarita, and welcome to everybody. It's good to see everybody here. As Sarita said, I'm Carrie Zeidman. I'm the current president of the Hillel of Silicon Valley. And I wanted to present our first speaker, Dr. Mark Goldfelder.
Excuse me?
Yes.
She doesn't live in Silicon Valley.
Correct. Her heart is here.
Oh.
Maybe.
Barbara, and can you mute yourselves?
Okay.
Can everybody please mute yourselves so that we can keep the background noise to a minimum? Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. So Dr. Mark Goldfeder is the director of the National Jewish Advocacy Center and a member of the United States Holocaust Memorial Council, Council for Hillels of Georgia, and has served as the founding editor of the Cambridge University Press series on law and Judaism. Goldfeder has taught law around the country and around the world. His scholarship focuses on law and religion, constitutional law, and international law, and he publishes widely in those areas, including both academically and in popular publications like CNN, The Wall Street Journal, The Hill, Forbes, and other major media outlets. He is also co-author of the 5-volume treatise, Religious Organizations and the Law. Goldfeder handles anti-Semitism and BDS cases around the country and lectures and writes widely on those topics. He has worked with local, state, and federal legislatures on measures to support the Jewish community and has defended students, professors, businesses, and nonprofits that were targeted for the support of the Jewish state. He has worked on cases at the International Criminal Court in The Hague and has successfully represented clients, including American and Israeli nonprofits, in federal litigation. In 2017, he received the Ofer Aviran Stand with Israel Award from Hillel, and in 2018, the John Barkin Israel Advocacy Award from the American Israel Public Affairs Committee in recognition of his work. His most recent law review article illustrates how and why states and universities should adopt the IHRA definition, while explaining the difference between protected political speech and thinly veiled anti-Semitism. I also want to personally thank Mark for all of his support and help in working with Sarita on the IHRA definition issue that we've had on our campuses lately. And so to introduce our next speaker is board member Chuck Taubman. Chuck.
Thank you, Carrie. Aliza D. Lewin is the president of the Brandeis Center for Human Rights, which combats the resurgence of anti-Semitism on college and university campuses through research, education, and legal advocacy. It trains and empowers students to understand their legal rights and educates administrators on best practices to combat racism and anti-Semitism on campus. In 2014, Ms. Lewin argued Zivotofsky versus Carey before the US Supreme Court, addressing the question, is it constitutional to grant American citizens born in Jerusalem the right to list Israel as their place of birth on their US passport? The court held that the president has the exclusive authority to recognize foreign sovereigns, paving the way for President Trump to recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights and Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Last October, after 18 years of her pro bono litigation, Secretary of State Pompeo revised the US passport regulations, and Ambassador David Friedman presented Mr. Zivotofsky with the first US passport to list Israel as place of birth for a US citizen born in Jerusalem. Ms. Lewin and her father, Nathan Lewin, also represented the Boeing family in its landmark litigation, establishing the right of American terror victims to obtain damages under American law against organizations that knowingly provide financial support to international terrorist groups. Ms. Lewin is the immediate past president of the American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists, which in January 2020 awarded her its Distinguished Pursuit of Justice Award. And now Mitch Reitman, Assistant Director of Hillel of Silicon Valley, will introduce Leora Rez.
Thank you, Chuck and Carrie. I'm pleased to introduce Leora Rez, who is the co-founder of StopAntisemitism.org, a nonprofit organization working to hold anti-Semites accountable and to create consequences for their bigoted actions by exposing the threat that they present to all Americans and showing how their ideologies conflict with American values, morals, and principles. Leora immigrated to America from the former Soviet Union as a small child with her family, escaping the horrors of socialism and anti-Semitism. She grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and proceeded to attend Brandeis University, where she earned her BS in neuroscience. Leora then obtained her MBA and subsequently worked in structured finance for over a decade. Leora transitioned her career focus from finance to social media in 2012 with the launch of the Jewish Chick brand. After growing a sizable audience, in 2018, Leora co-founded StopAntisemitism.org to bring the growing anti-Semitism she was encountering in the social media space to the forefront. The organization now reaches millions of people monthly. Leora and StopAntisemitism.org are regularly cited by mainstream media outlets, including CNN, the New York Post, the New York Times, NBC News, The Hill, and the Washington Times. Leora's Op-eds on anti-Semitism have been published in Newsweek, Hadassah Magazine, The Forward, Jewish News Syndicate, and the Al Jameener. Lyra was voted as a Jewish News Syndicate top 40 advocates for Israel, and named the top 50 pro-Israel influencer by Social Light Creative. I'm pleased that Lyra has joined the panel. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you, Carrie, Chuck, and Mitch, for introducing our speakers. As you can see, we're very privileged and honored to have such experts on our panel. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So Mark, I'm gonna direct this question to you. What is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism? Please tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. First of all, I just want to thank you very much for inviting me. I want to thank Sarita, Mitch, and the whole Silicon Valley team for putting together this important conversation and for all the great work that you're doing. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance itself, it was originally called the Task Force for International Cooperation on Holocaust Education, Remembrance, and Research. It's an intergovernmental organization that brings together governments and experts to strengthen, advance, and promote Holocaust education and research. It's the only intergovernmental organization whose mandate is to focus on Holocaust-related issues. And in the early 2000s, when there was evidence that anti-Semitism was once again on the rise, the experts at IHRA decided that it was worthwhile to take a leading role in trying to combat anti-Semitism. So they decided that in order to begin to address the problem of anti-Semitism, there first needed to be clarity about what anti-Semitism is. So they put together a committee on anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial, and they first developed their definition in 2003, 2004, and they published it as a working definition in 2005. It was later adopted as a guide by the US State Department as early as 2007 and officially adopted in 2010. In 2016, it was formally adopted by a plenary meeting of the, I think then 31 countries in IHRA, and the US State Department officially adopted it thereafter. Now, there's a reason why the IHRA definition is used by our federal government, by the 31 members of IHRA, all 50 countries except Russia that make up the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the European Commission, European Parliament, all EU member states, even countries like Serbia, Bahrain, and Albania. More importantly, there's a reason why hundreds of major Jewish organizations across the world and really across all political and religious spectrums representing Jewish people of all ages and backgrounds have adopted the definition. It's because they all agree that it best reflects their shared lived experience and the realities of how anti-Semitism actually manifests itself today.
Thank you. Why is the IHRA definition the right definition for this discussion today?
Sure. I mean, you hear a lot of critique about IHRA, especially on campuses, and most of it is quite unfounded, but people don't normally talk about why IHRA really is a good definition. So I'm glad you asked that question. Let me backtrack, and I'll start with an observation from the late Chief Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, who said that in terms of its focus, anti-Semitism often looks at Jews as a collective. And we're seeing this a lot in the past couple of weeks. And the idea being that while individual Jews might be tolerable, Jews as a separate collective identity shouldn't be allowed to exist with the same rights as everybody else. And that's why the majority of anti-Semitism in any given era tends to focus on the primary form of collective Jewish identity at that point in history. So throughout the Middle Ages, Jews were, for the most part, a religious community, and they were hated for their religion, even if the particular Jews that were being oppressed weren't religious. In the 19th and 20th centuries, when Jews became secularized, the primary unifying collective identity was their ethnicity. And so the hatred mutated to focus on race, even when they only had a trace amount of Jewish blood. And today, when the primary collective embodiment of Jewish people on the world stage is the people of Israel and their nation state, the Jews around the world are hated and held accountable for that state. Even if they're not Israeli, they're attacked in the streets of Los Angeles, New York, London, etc. So the practical problem really in defining anti-Semitism in any meaningful way is that it's a virus that mutates so quickly. Jews are criticized for whatever a particular society or even just a part of that society hates at that particular moment. So at the same time in the United States, for example, the right can call them radicals and left will say they're fundamentalists, they're too liberal, too conservative, too rich, a drain on society, too strong, too weak, too influential, too parasitical. They're all of these things. They're whatever a society doesn't like. And so a definition of anti-Semitism that can practically encompass all of these different possibilities and more, because whatever excuse you come up with, you can guarantee someone will hate you for it. You need a definition that can cut through those timely rationales for a timeless hatred. And if you want to actually protect people, you need a definition that focuses less on the reasons why people hate and more on the actions taken by those who express or harbor the hate, a praxeological or a conduct-based definition. And the definition that does this the best is the IHRA definition. It's precisely because of the examples it gives, which focus on the manifestations of anti-Semitism, meaning what anti-Semites do, as opposed to just why they do it. And that's what makes IHRA such a good definition. Now, its strength comes from the fact, the consensus of tens of thousands of people that it best represents their experience. But the way IHRA does that, the reason people feel that way is because, while anti-Semites around the world may give different reasons for their feelings, those feelings tend to end up manifesting themselves in very similar repetitive patterns.
Thank you, Mark. I'm going to direct this question to Eliza. Why is the definition of anti-Semitism necessary?
Sorry, let me unmute. So Mark really touched on it, and I may just phrase it a little bit differently. The reason we need a definition of anti-Semitism is because, unfortunately, most people in the world today don't understand anti-Semitism. That's why we have to define it. So because you can't combat an unknown. You can only combat and push back against something that you can recognize. So we need a definition so that we can recognize anti-Semitism. And as Sarita pointed out at the beginning of this whole program, the few people who do recognize anti-Semitism today are those people who at least understand the Holocaust. Because what we see is that what they recognize as anti-Semitism is the anti-Semitism that resembles the Holocaust. So, for instance, if somebody sees a swastika, then somebody who might be sensitive towards anti-Semitism and recognize will say, oh, I get it. I understand a swastika is anti-Semitic. Or if they hear a white supremacist or a Nazi, right, they realize because of the Holocaust that that's anti-Semitism. As you pointed out, Sarita, there are many people that don't even know anything about the Holocaust. So even that kind of anti-Semitism, they might not recognize as anti-Semitism. Maybe what they will recognize as anti-Semitism is when somebody who is very visibly Jewish is targeted, like we've seen in some of the recent attacks, or a gunman walks into a synagogue when Jews are in the middle of prayer and opens fire, then they'll say, okay, that's anti-Semitism. But beyond that, people have no clue. They don't know how to recognize or understand anti-Semitism. And as Mark was explaining, one of the reasons is that even though anti-Semitism is society's oldest hatred, it actually looks a little different in every generation, which is why people don't always understand and recognize it. The one constant that you will see, though, however, it doesn't matter what the generation, what the era, how many years ago it was, is that anti-Semitism will always take whatever is, as Mark said, what's hated, the evil of that era, what's viewed as that society's misfortune, and it'll pin it on the Jew. It'll blame the Jew. The Jew is scapegoated. The Jew becomes the source of that misfortune, the cause, right? So we can go back, as Mark was saying, when religion was the issue, well, the Jew was accused of being the Christ killer. There's nothing worse. There's nothing more evil than that, right? For at times of the Black Death, the Jew was the cause of the disease. They were blamed for the bubonic plague. When it comes even to socialist ideas, right? For the socialists, the Jews are viewed as the capitalists. For capitalists, the Jews were viewed as the socialists. For the Nazis who wanted a pure Aryan race, nothing was more evil than the Jew who was the ultimate race polluter. If you think for a moment about what our current society has deemed our greatest misfortune, our greatest evil, what is it that has led to massive upheaval in the United States last year and now? It's the issue of racism, apartheid, colonialism, right? Those are the evils that our generation has determined we must combat in the name of social justice. And isn't it interesting that so many in the world today have deemed this one tiny democracy, the only democracy in that area in the Middle East, the only place in that region of the world where all ethnicities, races, genders, religions are all equal under the law? That's the place that the world has decided is the worst offender when it comes to racism, apartheid, settler colonialism. What is that state, right? That's the Jewish state. That's the Jewish collective. And if the idea of anti-Semitism has always been to target the Jew and to try and marginalize, as Sarita said, and ostracize the Jew, right? To say the Jew is beyond the pale, we're going to deny the Jew his place in society, right? Think about the Yellow Star of David of the Nazis, right? That they made the Jews wear the Yellow Star of David. The idea was this person, you don't engage with them. You don't do business with them. You don't have them as your doctors or your lawyers. They have to be excluded. They have to be pushed out. The idea of traditional anti-Semitism was to deny individual Jews their place in society. What's happening today with the new form of anti-Semitism is they're trying to do the exact same thing to the Jewish collective, to the Jewish state of Israel. It's the one country, the only country that's being singled out and told it has no right to exist. It's illegitimate. It's racist since it's, it's a racist endeavor and has no right to exist as a Jewish state. That is trying to deny Israel, the Jewish homeland, its place in the society of nations. That's today's contemporary anti-Semitism, and we need the definition to explain to people what today's anti-Semitism looks like, how it manifests, particularly this new form of anti-Semitism as it manifests in connection with Israel. And that's what the IHRA definition does.
Thanks, Elisa. I want to bring the students to present their experiences, and then we'll come back to the panelists. As you just heard, understanding and identifying anti-Semitism is crucial to effectively addressing it. So you would think that when the Jewish students went to their administrators or their student governments to introduce IHRA and ask them to adopt it, that it would have been a no-brainer. But our students have been met with a lot of resistance, both by administrators and by their peers in student government. In fact, some detractors or students who've spoken with anti-Semitic sentiment are the ones who want to define anti-Semitism as an alternative, which has been horrifying for all of us. So I'm just going to introduce Ori Nerpaz, Ron Levy, Valerie Rutenberg, and Jacob Taub, who will present briefly what their experiences have been, and then we'll go back to the panelists who will put everything more into perspective. So Ori, are you on the call?
Yes, I am.
Great, thank you so much. And Ori has to run because we're fighting bad staff at the campuses he serves. The campus he goes to school. Go ahead.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ori, and I'm a student senator at Foothill College. I'm an American Israeli, and I moved to the Bay Area after living in Israel for 10 years. Since moving here, I've personally witnessed anti-Semitism and realized that it is not uncommon for certain people to resent Jews. In 2019, I enrolled in Foothill College after graduating from Palo Alto High School. And after my first year in college, I discovered Silicon Valley Hillel, with which I've been working to combat anti-Semitism on college campuses. When the IHRA resolution started getting passed in schools across the nation, I quickly jumped the gun and attempted to pass it in my own college. After presenting it to the student board, it received a lot of support and passed with a unanimous consensus just a week later. A couple of months later, different organizations started hearing of the IHRA resolution getting passed around campuses and decided to combat it. I personally experienced this when the IHRA resolution was proposed in Foothill College's sister school, De Anza College. People from around the country joined the meeting and aggressively attacked the merit of the resolution. The De Anza student body did not want to make a decision and decided to table it and not address IHRA indefinitely. Furthermore, those same groups, with the help of certain De Anza student board members, attempted to repeal the already passed IHRA resolution at Foothill College. With the help of our student body president, we made sure that those groups would not succeed in their goal. The fight for passing IHRA still continues to this day. The majority of colleges around the US have not passed it. This is why we must keep fighting to make sure that Your
No,
students
that's all
across the
three.
nation are protected from
Do something
anti-Semitism.
else. No, it's 3:00.
Allen's, would you mind muting yourself? Because I think thank you so much. Thank you. Go ahead, Ori.
Thank you. That's it.
Thank you. Who's going next? Ron?
Sure. Good afternoon. Hello, Silicon Valley, panelists, friends, and guests. My name is Ron Levy. I'm a rising senior at San Jose State University, majoring in economics and president of Students Supporting Israel on campus for the past 5 semesters. During my time working in Israel advocacy-oriented organizations and environments in high school and college, I've honed a lot of my thought into the Jewish concepts of lehadir et hanefesh and cheshbon nefesh, to account for the soul and to uplift the soul. Like many other schools across the nation, San Jose State University is currently in the midst of adopting the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. When we started in October of 2020, we were at first unsure of the route we wanted to take, whether it be through the administration or the student government. Knowing our relationship with our chief diversity officer, we decided to go the administration route in hopes to adopt the working definition on our campus in the following months. After months of back and forth and reaching out to the administration and relevant faculty, we had our first meeting introducing the definition to the Chief Diversity Officer on February 22nd, 2021. Using a healthy mix of emotion and knowledge, we had presented a presentation showing not only the rise in anti-Semitism according to multiple reports by credible sources, including the Amcha Initiative and FBI. She was very pleased that we came forward with the resolution and explained that it would be a 2-week-long process that included multiple conversations with the president, campus cabinet, and the chancellor of the California State University. We had waited 2 weeks and had heard no response, even after multiple follow-up emails. 3 weeks, no response. 4 weeks, no response. It was not until April 8th, 2021, when we had next met, when we learned that they were ready to adopt the definition, excluding the one example of anti-Semitism that states, denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination by claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor. As a proud Israeli American, I, along with the Jewish community at SJSU, were appalled to hear this. Our understanding of their objection is that the SJSU wants to give the freedom to anyone to call racism where they see it and are objecting based on that and not on Israel per se. The administration and Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion put so much time and resources into combating hate and systemic racism during these times, which is why we found this to be completely out of left field. Unsure as to why this was omitted, we requested to meet with the president to hear her thoughts as to why this example was thrown out. A whopping 6 weeks after the meeting, we were able to secure a supplementary meeting with the president, vice president, and CDO, and a follow-up message in light of the events in southern Israel these past couple weeks. On June 10th, 2021, we hope to come out with a good story and an example that with persistence comes the pursuit of excellence, which is exactly what I champion as a Zionist every single day. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron, and thanks for all that you're doing. We're going now with Valerie and Jacob for Santa Clara University.
Jacob, okay, I'll begin and then you can supplement whatever I don't cover. It's actually just listening to Ron right now. It's interesting and very eerie how similar our experiences were. So Jacob and I'm Valerie Rudenberg, by the way. I didn't introduce myself. I'm a junior at Santa Clara University. I'm also president of Students Supporting Israel there. So around, I want to say in mid-March, Jacob and I also wanted to pass IHRA at our campus, and we found that the administrative route would be more, we at that time thought the administrative route would be more promising. Little did we know. So we met with the essentially president of or overseer of discrimination cases. So if there's ever incidents of racism, anti-Semitism, discrimination on campus, this is the person you would go to at Santa Clara University. So we met with this administrator. We spoke to her at length for approximately, I want to say, an hour and a half about IHRA. We went back and forth. She seemed very receptive. She even told us that. She said she was going to go and speak with other administrators and try and convince them of why IHRA was so important and why it should be passed at Santa Clara University by the administration. We then, on that call, had a tentative but rather firm plan to meet on the 19th of April. I even set aside the date on my calendar to meet with her. So a week prior to that meeting, Jacob followed up with this administrator and just said, hey, so our meeting's in a week, just want to double check and make sure this was still on the table so we could prepare ourselves and leave the date open to meet with you again. No response. The day before the meeting we were supposed to have, Jacob once again followed up and said, hey, just following up again, are we still meeting at 12 o'clock tomorrow? Just let us know. I'm totally happy to reschedule. Once again, no response. The next day at the time when we were supposed to meet, of course, the administrator did not show up, and we have been quote unquote ghosted ever since. We have not heard a response ever since, and it is currently almost June. So after that, we gave up. We realized that the administrative route was not the route for us, and we came to the ASG, the student government. So approximately 4 weeks ago, Jacob and I presented the IHRA resolution to the student government, which we at the time thought would go by very smoothly as Mark Goldfeder had mentioned, this has been passed and accepted unanimously around the world. So after we were given 2 minutes to talk about the IHRA resolution, the senators ushered us out of the room and said that we were no longer allowed to be at the meeting. We had to go home. We weren't allowed to hear the discussion, and that public forum would be held the following week for us to share our opinions. Throughout this week, the student government was able to reach out to Students for Justice in Palestine group, the Multicultural Center, which is highly anti-Semitic. I have a whole history with them, MENA, SCAP, and hundreds of other students, and let them know about this resolution so they could prepare and words of opposition and reserve their Thursday night to attend the Senate meeting and speak out against IHRA. Of course, 100 students that following week, 100, came to speak in opposition to the IHRA proposal. It was just Jacob and I in support. Consequently, it didn't pass. Now, 1 week, I went a little ahead. So 2 weeks ago was the discussion of it when 100 students came in protest. The week after was the meeting during which IHRA was to be voted on. So prior to this, Jacob, if you want to mention this part, because this is more about you meeting with Hawad and such, if you want to take over at this part, and then I'll let you do that. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So my thought process is that even if we can't get IHRA through, we still should try to take some action to at least open the door for discussions on anti-Semitism and to help people start thinking about it, kind of kick the can down the road a little bit. Because it's important that we at least make people start to think about anti-Semitism before, something bad happens on our campus, because we're blessed to have not had a major anti-Semitic incident in my 4 years, the most previous one happening the year before I came to Santa Clara. I'm currently a senior and I'm graduating in a couple weeks. But it's interesting to see because at that meeting, all of these people came out and talked and wanted to try to do things. I didn't have anyone reach out to me after the meeting about actually wanting to help address anti-Semitism.
Yes.
Of all of these people that came and seemed enthusiastic about it and wanted to talk about anti-Semitism and how they feel that the definition might silence them, okay, we can talk about this. We have the ability to communicate, and I can hopefully try to help them understand why Jewish students might not feel safe with the environment they're creating. I personally know a couple of these people from like SJP, and I can tell you that they aren't themselves anti-Semitic, although the environment they might be creating is. And Hawad mentioned this when he was talking about this inadvertently. He said that when they had a discussion about IHRA, somebody said that they felt they would be silenced by up to 6 of the examples within IHRA. And even if you exclude the 5 examples that are specifically about Israel, you're still stuck in a situation where where you have admitted to this person having one anti-Semitic belief. And like at the following meeting, that's coming to speak against it is showing up with alias names because they're afraid. But it's really funny to see that they don't quite understand that, especially in light of recent events and all these attacks on Jewish people in the name of Free Palestine, and these, as I believe it was Mark or Eliza said about things that have been happening in LA or in New York. They don't seem to understand how the atmosphere that they have created could be seen as intimidatory towards Jewish students. And to me, that's part of the reason why IHRA is important, is to at least help people understand and to open the door. My personal experiences at Santa Clara have been more so benign. People have said or done slightly anti-Semitic things, but it's out of ignorance. A friend of mine from Spain, for instance, was telling me about how he loved Jewish people because they're smart and wealthy and influential and powerful and want to control things. And, there's a lot to unpack there with that statement, but he just didn't know better. And I tried to help him understand why he was being anti-Semitic. And that's why I think IHRA is important for Santa Clara, is to help all of these people that don't think about anti-Semitism, because why would they? They're living their lives as a normal person. They've never met a Jewish person. It's not their fault, but we have to try to be able to help them and understand their biases.
So yeah, just because you
Valerie,
our timeline though. Oh,
I just want to make sure that we make it as brief as the rest of.
So sorry.
Thank you.
Can I just mention the most recent divestment resolution? Because I think that that's super relevant.
Yeah. That's how I want you to conclude.
Yes, that's where I'm going with this, because I think that's really relevant. So basically, as I mentioned previously, you can see that the timeline for us attempting to pass IHRA was approximately 3 weeks. So the entire school was able to prepare, had weeks on weeks to come and reserve their Thursdays to speak out against IHRA. So during the meeting in which IHRA was supposed to be voted on, of course it didn't pass, I see on the agenda, somewhere towards the end of the list, is a resolution in solidarity with Palestine. I want to mention we were not informed about this prior. I had no idea that this was going to be presented. I was coincidentally at that meeting because of the voting on IHRA. So Hawad, who was a senator who presented this resolution, said during the meeting that the resolution was added only minutes before the meeting. In the meantime, Hawad was able to get 75 people to come and speak in favor of the resolution. This resolution, by the way, is a basically BDS, but covert BDS. So he got 75 people to come and speak in favor of the resolution. Meanwhile, Jacob and I were uninformed. The Jewish community was completely and utterly uninformed. In this singular meeting, the resolution was discussed. 75 people spoke in favor of it. I was the only one who unmuted myself and said something in opposition about how BDS is incredibly anti-Semitic. In this singular meeting, the resolution passed. For IHRA, it took 3 separate weeks to discuss it. And in the end, of course, it wasn't passed. For this resolution, in front of my eyes, minutes passed, and BDS was just passed under the radar. Yeah, so as you can see, I'm very heated. This is a recent development, and many Jewish students have come forward to me and said that they're incredibly afraid right now on their campus. I've urged several fellow students to come and speak out against it, but a lot of them have said, Sarita, as you witnessed, that they are incredibly afraid to do so, not only because of public backlash. I was told myself that I was quote unquote canceled on campus. But I truly believe physical safety is on the table here too. So yeah, that's what we're dealing with here right now at our Jesuit campus.
Thank you all, Jacob and Valerie. And the reason I wanted to do this now is because it puts in perspective that while something makes sense, like the IHRA definition, it's not so easy for us to get it adopted at our campuses. I can answer the questions about the ANS and all that after our panelists come back, and then we'll address all the questions on the chat. So I want to go back now to Eliza, and because this relates to the schools. The executive order to combat anti-Semitism was issued in December of 2019. And how does that relate to the IHRA definition? How does it apply Please explain what the executive order is and what's the effect of it.
Sure. First, I just want to commend all the students. You folks are absolutely extraordinary. And it is an incredibly difficult environment out there right now. And I listened to your stories and you are remarkable. And I want to say that the Brandeis Center is here to help you. I'm happy after this. I'll put my email in the chat to continue the conversation with any and all of you about how we might be able to assist you. Because what we do, and you'll hear in a little bit, is try and use legal initiatives and articulate this in a way that the university might actually understand and recognize what's happening, right? Because one of the biggest problems, and I'll get in a second to the executive order, is that administrators mistakenly think that what's happening on their campus is just a political disagreement. And they think that this is just a speech issue. And they're therefore not about to get in the middle of it because everybody's got their First Amendment right. And in this country, the First Amendment protects even hate speech. And so don't expect us to say anything or to pick a side. I don't know if there's somebody who's Mr. Yeah, thank you. And so the challenge is getting the university to recognize that what's really happening on campus is and I think Jacob may be right? There are some very deliberate, determined groups that want to marginalize and ostracize and silence the Jewish community. And then there are others that are just kind of going along for the ride and getting swept up in it out of kind of this whole social, racial justice movement and not realizing just how anti-Semitic the environment that they're creating is. But the key is to get the universities to realize that what is happening on campus is the unlawful marginalization and ostracizing of Jewish students. And the university has a legal obligation to protect Jewish students from that harassment and discrimination. And that is Title VI of the Civil Rights Act and the executive order. So how does it work, right? Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 basically says that any entity that receives government funding may not discriminate on the basis of race, color, or national origin. Pretty much every single university in the country, whether public or private, gets some kind of public funding. There's a tiny number of universities, mainly parochial schools, that are totally privately funded. So all of these schools are covered by Title VI. The thing about Title VI is that it doesn't talk about religion, right? I said it protects against discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin. And years ago, that actually became an issue, particularly after 9/11, because there were religious groups that were finding they were being subjected to tremendous bullying and harassment in schools. Muslim students, Sikhs who were being mistaken for Muslims after 9/11 were subjected to it. And so the question came up, well, does Title VI apply when you have religious groups that are claiming they're being discriminated against and the schools and universities are not protecting them? Ken Marcus, who's the founder of the Brandeis Center, actually was at that point working and running he was the head of the Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Education. He held that office both in the Bush administration and now again in the Trump administration. And this question came to him, and that's when he said, of course, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act protects members of religious groups when they're being targeted on the basis of race, color, national origin. So in other words, if you have a member of a faith group that's being discriminated against on the basis of their race or national ethnic origin, that's covered and protected by Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. So what we have been arguing to universities with, I will say, some success, is the idea that for many Jewish students, their sense of connection and support for Israel, their Zionism, is an integral part of their identity as a Jew, right? If you understand that Judaism is not just a religion, but it also is this sense of Jewish peoplehood, and the Jewish people have this ancient ancestral connection to the land of Israel. Our Jewish identity is intertwined with this place, right? What do we say Passover and Yom Kippur next year in Jerusalem? You know, over half of the 613 commandments are actually tied to the land of Israel and can only be fulfilled in the land of Israel, right? It's this many Jewish students, even if they're not religiously observant, feel that need to support Israel, some for religious reasons, but others because they view Israel as the safety net for the Jewish people, right? Our security against never again. So for whatever that reason, that expression of support for Israel is an expression of their Jewish identity. And what's happening today on campuses is Jews are being pressured to shed that part of their Jewish identity. They're being told, you want to join us, you want to come march with us on women's rights, LGBT rights, immigration rights, climate change, whatever it is, you're welcome only if you first shed that part of your Jewish identity. Disavow Israel, get rid of that, and then you can come. If your Judaism is just your little private Jewish identity, no connection to the Jewish people or support for Israel. And so what we have started to explain to universities is that that is a form of national ethnic origin discrimination that is covered by Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. So what happened in 2004 when Ken Marcus was then the head of the Office of Civil Rights is he wrote a Dear Colleague letter that explained this idea. And that was the Bush administration. 2010 in the Obama administration, the Department of Justice adopted that same understanding. They issued their own Dear Colleague letter that quoted from Ken Marcus's 2004 letter. So by 2010, you had both Department of Education, Department of Justice saying Jews are protected against this kind of discrimination on the basis of national or ethnic origin discrimination. And you had the State Department using already at that point, as Mark had said, the IHRA definition as the definition of anti-Semitism. So what did the executive order in 2019 do? It took this understanding of Title VI, it kicked it up a notch. So it now became not just the level of these Dear Colleague letters. Now it was a presidential executive order saying Title VI of the Civil Rights Act protects Jewish students from this kind of discrimination on the basis of national or ethnic origin. But what it also did is it linked Title VI to the IHRA definition. And it said, first of all, this applies not only to the Department of Education, Department of Justice, this applies to every government agency that gives money to entities that are covered by Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. And if you're going to be doing an investigation of an allegation of anti-Semitic discrimination, how do you know what anti-Semitic discrimination on the basis of national origin is? You look to the IHRA definition, right? How do you know what anti-Semitism is? You look to the IHRA definition. So it requires, when there are complaints brought against universities, it requires the Department of Education or the Department of Justice to be using the IHRA definition already to investigate and determine whether or not there has been unlawful harassment and discrimination on that basis. So whether or not universities are independently adopting it, technically, because of the executive order, which has not been rescinded, the Department of Education is supposed to use it. Now, the catch there is when Ken Marcus was the head of the Office of Civil Rights, he definitely used it and understood this.
So you don't need, yeah, it's fine. I just need to,
whether the Biden administration will apply and enforce this, with the same kind of vigor, we have yet to see. So that's why it's important to try and get universities to also formally adopt it. But the university should understand that all they're being asked to do is, first of all, formalize what the Department of Education and the understanding of Title VI already is, and use the definition that now already under the executive order is going to be applied to them anyway.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. I want to direct a question now to Leora. Given that a lot of the resolutions we're fighting right now were inspired by the situation that we just faced in Israel, where Hamas attacked the Jewish state and then all the balagan ensued. I wanted to ask you how you think that this definition, or could it have addressed what happened, and how the social media attacks could have been prevented by implementing IHRA on social media platforms?
Sure, absolutely. So in August 2020, we had led a coalition of 120 NGOs petitioning Facebook and subsequently its sister company, Instagram, to fully implement IHRA. And when we talk about various examples of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, that includes equating Jews as a collective via the state of Israel to Nazis, calling Jews Nazis, calling Israeli policies Nazis, holding Jews collectively responsible for the state of Israel, using symbols and images associated with classic anti-Semitism and relating it to Israel, such as world domination. The Jews used to dominate as a singular, now as a collective. So we had really been pushing hard, again, this time in 2020, when anti-Semitism was nowhere near its levels that we're seeing this month. So let's fast forward now, and it's no secret that that people under the age of 35, what do they do when they first wake up? You instantaneously start scrolling Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, whatever your social platform choices. And you know, they're not running to the TV to flip on CNN. Their main news source is social media. And again, it's primarily 35 and younger. News stats are showing it's actually 45 and younger, where TV and news is basically becoming obsolete. Everybody is going to social media for their news fill. Now, if the social media platforms were or had successfully implemented IHRA, approximately 80% of the anti-Semitic social media posts would not be allowed under that definition today. And back in 2012, 2013, when I first started working in social media, I often heard, you know, this isn't reality. This isn't the real world. Everything was still very based on, you know, print media and traditional media sources. We like to touch newspapers. We watch the television. You fast forward now, everything, advertisers, news sources, scholarly articles, everything is being shared on social media. Again, whichever platform your choice is. And anti-Semitism, for instance, its main home is social media. It spills out to college campuses where anti-Semitic BDS campaigns are started. It spills out to rallies, where pro-Palestinian rallies, and then you know, it trickles down to violence on the streets. You have the Nation of Islam, you know, promoting their hatred of Jews. You have Black Hebrew Israelites. So if we just take it just 1 year ago, not even a year ago, 10 months or 9 months, we were begging Facebook and Instagram to please chat with us. And again, these over 100 NGOs to implement this, because the lives of Jews depended on it. We were told that social media opinions do not influence real life actions, where we completely disagree. You have the Tree of Life synagogue shooter, you know, when his manifestos and previous social media posts were pulled, clearly that's not true. He exemplified horrific, you know, postings about Jews and various other minorities. These past 2 weeks has shown that social media doesn't, anti-Semitism on social media doesn't stay on social media. You know, the anger and the manifestation of hatred towards Jews in the diaspora, holding us accountable for a conflict happening halfway around the world, is spilling into the streets of New York City. It's spilling into a sushi restaurant in Beverly Grove. The police have just arrested a second Palestinian man, or a pro-Palestinian supporter, in relation to literally driving around a restaurant in a megaphone screaming, "Who's the Jew? Who's the Jews?" I mean, this is reminiscent of 1939. So you have this pro-Palestinian anti-Semitic propaganda just in the last 2 weeks alone, spilling over into real life violence against Jews in America. There was a study done in the past 2 weeks alone by Community Security Network, where anti-Semitism in the past 2 weeks, while this conflict was happening, an 80% increase in violence against Jews has occurred in America. In London, it's over 500%. And it's really, really being fanned by these social media posts. So if IHRA was implemented, and implemented correctly and properly policed by content makers and content watchers, I honestly believe that we would not be at the levels of violence that we have right now.
Thank you so much. I wanna go back to you, Mark, and talk a little bit about legal matters. Give us an example of what the adoption of IHRA would look like. And the other thing I would like you to address is some of the examples, like the students mentioned about the saying that the state of Israel is a racist endeavor, and people not wanting to use that example, or people saying that it silences freedom of speech. So if you can address that in your next presentation, it would be great. Thank you.
Sure. And I will also at some point loop in Aliza, because the Brandeis Center does really great work on this and has a fantastic white paper that outlines a lot about the implementation. But let me start with the second question, which is, again, a lot of the pushback on IHRA comes broadly from the fact that among the list of potentially anti-Semitic behavior, it includes useful examples of discriminatory anti-Israel acts that can sometimes cross the line into anti-Semitism. And so critics challenge the use of IHRA on basically two main grounds. First, they say that it conflates political speech against Israel with anti-Semitism, which is, that part's just not true. There's actually a safe harbor provision in the IHRA definition, which says that criticism for Israel similar to that leveled against any other country is not anti-Semitism. But again, the critics of IHRA say that's insufficient. Why? Because there may be some good non-anti-Semitic reasons why a person wants to single out the one Jewish state from among all the other countries and hold them to a different standard. And to those critics, I say, great, read the definition, because it never says that these examples are always anti-Semitic. In fact, their concern is precisely why the definition has another caveat, which is that all the examples given, including the ones about Israel, could, taking into account the overall context, be anti-Semitic. And again, to bring this back to the sort of broader university context is crucial here. It's in all instances of alleged discrimination. Anti-Semitism is not different than racism or sexism, in that context matters, and no two cases are ever exactly the same. And the reason the examples are provided in the definition is explicitly not because all forms of criticism about Israel are anti-Semitic, and it takes pains to point that out, but it's because people claim that no criticism can ever cross the line. And if there's ever any evidence of why we need those examples, the last 2 weeks has given us the clearest possible vision. The second objection is that in a policy context, if used in the wrong hands, it could theoretically stifle speech. It's a valid argument that if used improperly, it could stifle speech, but it's misleading, because the correct conclusion is not don't use IHRA, it's don't use IHRA incorrectly. And of course, these kind of policies need to be made carefully because, as we've all agreed, free speech is a core aspect of democracy, and there's no general hate speech exception for anti-Semitism or any other kind of hatred. And that's precisely why schools that adopt this should not adopt it in the form of a speech code. Everyone on both sides agrees with that principle. And it's a red herring to pretend that it's an issue, because most of the things we're talking about, these policies they're not targeting speech. They involve discriminatory harassment, sometimes in the last couple of weeks, criminal conduct, and those are not forms of protected speech. And unlike speech, that conduct is subject to government regulation. And how do you know which conduct can be regulated? It turns out there's an answer. There's well-established Supreme Court precedent requiring behavior to be objectively offensive to fall under the category of discriminatory harassment. So how do you know if a behavior meets an objectively offensive standard? You need an objectively well-accepted definition, like the IHRA definition.
I have a follow-up question.
Sure.
If IHRA is not legally binding, and just like the case that Ori spoke about Foothill College, where the student government had adopted the IHRA definition, but now they're trying to pass a resolution that is clearly against Israel. How can they balance the IHRA definition they have adopted to this new resolution that they're trying to push forward?
So I think there might be a couple of questions there. The first part of that question was, if it's not legally binding, why is it worth?
Yeah, how will it stick? I mean, what can you do with it if it's not legally binding?
Sure.
And then I'm thinking specifically about Foothill, where we have that perfect example where IHRA was adopted, but here we're dealing with a resolution that is anti-Semitic.
Great. So first of all, in terms of the legally binding thing, that's a little bit, I think people tend to misunderstand it. It's not legally binding, but a couple of things. First of all, what it actually does, it doesn't create any new law. So it's not legally binding in that sense, but it plugs a hole in existing anti-discrimination law. So anti-Semitism is already not allowed. And all we're doing here is clarifying what anti-Semitism means. And again, that's sort of like Aliza was explaining what the executive order on combating anti-Semitism actually did. In terms of things it can do without being legally binding, and again, I want to really sort of make sure that everyone understands the Brandeis Center, I think, is been the leader on this sort of aspect. There's a ton of things you can do to make use of the IHRA definition as a tool to educate the university. That means everyone from faculty, staff to students about what anti-Semitism is proactively and reactively. You can incorporate it into all kinds of trainings. In the event that there is an anti-Semitic incident, and now we're coming to your question, that does involve protected speech like a statement, the university can use IHRA to respond with the university's own counter speech, utilizing the definition. Again, it's a non-regulatory way to educate the community about why that kind of speech is anti-Semitic and against the university's values. And again, to be clear, we're not saying anti-Semitic speech should be criminalized or contained, right? It should just be labeled correctly. And if there's nothing wrong with calling out racist speech as racist or sexist speech as sexist, there's nothing wrong with the university for calling out anti-Semitic speech as anti-Semitic. And the problem is, again, without the adoption of IHRA for too long, the conflation of speech with conduct, that's the first part we talked about, and anti-Semitism with criticism of Israel has allowed anti-Semites to essentially do what they want and then claim that they were merely expressing political views.
Yeah, just if I could build on that for a second, it's really, really, really important to understand that when you say IHRA is not legally binding, right, it's a definition. It's like a term in a dictionary. It's not a criminal code. It's not a law. That's what it means when it's not legally binding, right? It doesn't criminalize anything. It doesn't censor anything. It doesn't prohibit anything. It doesn't punish anything. None of that. It's a definition. It's an explanation of what anti-Semitism is. That's what it means that it's non-legally binding. Now, how you can use it, right? How do you use a definition? So if you already have a student conduct code on your campus, right? Not a speech code, and that's what Mark was making clear. We're not talking about censoring speech. We're talking about conduct that crosses the line and that the universities have recognized is a violation of the university's conduct code because you are harassing or discriminating against a student. If you're trying to figure out whether that conduct is anti-Semitic, then you would look to the definition to understand what anti-Semitism is, right? If you realize that there is anti-Semitic speech going on, yes, in this country, you have a First Amendment right to express yourself as a bigot, as a racist, as an anti-Semite. But you don't have a right to be insulated from being called a racist or a bigot or an anti-Semite if you say racist or bigoted or anti-Semitic things. And so what IHRA enables the university to do is say, oh, wait a minute, that is anti-Semitic, what you just did, right? You just compared Israelis to Nazis, or you just denied the Jewish people their right to self-determination by suggesting that Israel is a racist endeavor since its creation. That is actually anti-Semitic. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the university's speech rights to call it out, right? Just like we would call out anti-racist speech or bigoted speech. And we'd say, you know what, that's very divisive. That runs counter to our values on the university of mutual respect and inclusion. And therefore, we condemn and distance ourselves from that statement. We don't support that statement because we believe that our university has to be a safe place for everybody to live and engage in with their full identities. And we recognize that this kind of speech violates that effort that we have here. And so we're going to use our own speech to call it out. That's how you use the IHRA definition. You use the IHRA definition to train and educate your community on what anti-Semitism is and to call it out when it's eating away at your community.
Thank you, Lisa. I think what I would like to suggest is that each of the panelists do like a little wrap up or last statement, because there's quite a few questions on the chat and I want to allow time for that. So let's start with Leora. If you want to make, the message you want to leave the audience with about the importance of IHRA, in particular with social media and such, and then we'll go to Alyssa and Mark.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, social media is our main communication method. And the last thing that we tell students and users is to shy away from expressing your support for the state of Israel, for Israel getting attacked, for anything going on campus that is deemed anti-Semitic according to IHRA, which includes the new anti-Semitism, vilifying Jews as a collective, referring to Jews Israelis as Nazis, yada, yada, and to really push forward, not to be afraid, because we have more allies than we think. The Hadids and the Dua Lipas and these, mega stars, yes, they have clout, but we have tons of allies in communities such as Asian communities, Latino communities. They are just not picked up by the mainstream press. So we don't personally, unless you live and breathe it like we do, where we're working in it, you don't particularly see it, so you feel alone. I cannot stress enough, you are not alone.
Thank you so much. I wish that we knew who all those peoples and entities are, because it does feel like we're pretty alone, especially because what we see is not in support of the Jewish people. So thank you for what you do. Thank you. Okay, how about I go with Mark?
Sure. I want to echo something that I think both Leora and Elisa touched on, which is I'm always inspired when I hear from students who are really on the front lines and doing things that are incredible and worthwhile. And I hope that in some ways, a conversation like this is helpful to you, so that you see that there are people like Elisa and Leora who are in your corner and who are there to help you, and that you're not alone. And so I would just encourage you to reach out to myself, to Elisa, to Leora, and to never feel alone in that sense. There are definitely people who have your back.
Thank you, Mark. I just want to say that our students are very fortunate because they know our Hillel stands strong with them. And we have a team of agencies or organizations we're working with who have helped us through all these resolutions. So fortunately, our students have a really good support system. And Mark, you're one of those people who came to our aid, and I think Ron might have been in one of the meetings where we discussed our strategy for how to present IHRA. So we're very fortunate to have that support. So I'm going to go to Lisa, and then we'll open up for questions.
So I will say that the Brandeis Center has a program which we call our Jigsaw Fellows. That's our Justice Initiative guiding student activists worldwide. It's a select group of law school students that we've taught these areas of the law that you need to understand to help combat the anti-Semitism on campuses. And what we do is, when we're contacted by students, we often will pair them up with Jigsaw Fellows so that the law school students can help work to mentor and guide and assist the undergraduates when it comes to talking points, when it comes to articulating complaints, and trying to articulate it, as I say, using the language of harassment and discrimination, so that the universities will understand that we're not talking about a political disagreement. We're talking about an attempt to marginalize and ostracize members of the Jewish community. And just one final little point that I think the recent engagement and conflict between Hamas and Israel also emphasized is that what we really have going on here is a question about, when you talk about is going against Israel considered anti-Semitic? And the real question is, when you're going against Israel, what's your ultimate goal? Are you really seeking coexistence? Are you looking for coexistence between Arab and Israelis, but you just don't think that the current policies of the current government are going to get you there? Or is really your ultimate goal the destruction of the one and only Jewish state? What IHRA says is that if your ultimate goal, right, if what you're expressing is that you don't believe the Jewish people have a right to self-determination, they don't have a right to a Jewish homeland in any borders, well, that is anti-Semitic. That's anti-Semitic. And so if the criticism of Israel is designed to destroy the one and only Jewish state, that's anti-Semitism. On the other hand, if your criticism is intended to be constructive because you believe in coexistence and you're just trying to talk about and critique the current policies of the current government of Israel, then you can have that robust debate on campus, right? You can talk about where should the borders be, what should a Jewish homeland look like, how should you balance between security concerns and human rights issues, but you can't have that conversation with somebody who doesn't believe that the Jewish homeland has a right to exist. And what you saw with the Abraham Accords is you had Arab countries that said, you know what, we believe in coexistence. That's what we're seeking. And then who did you have on the other side who still was saying, no, we're for anti-normalization and we don't believe in coexistence. That was Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, the groups that said, we just want to destroy the Jewish state. So if you still have on campus groups that are saying, we're backing Hamas in this battle, right? Who are they backing? They're not backing and looking for coexistence. They're backing the people that are looking to destroy the one and only Jewish state. According to IHRA, that's the anti-Semitism.
Thank you, Lisa. So I see some questions on the chat. Do people who wrote questions on the chat want to ask the questions, or would you like me to read them? I see a comment by David, Nora, and I believe Dorothea is no longer on the call. So, okay, I'll read the questions. Nora said, how to combat hugely popular claim that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. My own cousin says, I can't be anti-Semitic. I am Jewish, but Zionism is not the same, which is something that has been used. How about you, Leora? You want to take this question?
Yeah, absolutely. So Zionism is a simple belief that Jews, we yearn to live in our homeland. It in no way states that we're anti-Palestinian, that we don't believe Palestinians have a right to live, to breathe, to function as a society normally. When you criticize the state of Israel, as a normal person should, just like you would criticize or complain about it as Americans, we complain about everything. That's not anti-Semitic. When you're calling for the erasure of the state of Israel that inhabits 7 million Jews and 2 million Muslims and Christians, you're calling for literally taking an entire democratic country and calling for its removal. So that indeed, when you, and again, they're not particularly not calling, they're not referring to the Muslims and the Christians. When they say Zionists, we all know it's code word for Jew. But it's, again, not the singular, it's the collective. And when you're calling for the erasure or the removal of a Jewish nation in full, that is absolutely anti-Semitic. It's the new anti-Semitism that focuses on the Jewish collective and whole versus a Jewish singular man or woman.
If I could just add to that for a second, I think it's important to remember, right? I say for many Jews, not all Jews, for many Jews, Zionism is as integral to their Jewish identity as observing the Jewish Sabbath or keeping a kosher diet. You do not yourself have to be a Jewish Sabbath observer to recognize and accept that discriminating or harassing a Jewish Sabbath observer because they're a Jewish Sabbath observer, right? You're going to discriminate against them as a Jewish Sabbath observer. That's unlawful harassment and discrimination. By the same token, you're not asking your cousin to say, be a Zionist. She doesn't have to be a Zionist to recognize that if Jews are being harassed and discriminated on the basis of the Zionist part of their identity, if they're being excluded and pushed out of progressive movements and clubs or student governments because they're saying, you know, let's impeach their Zionist ass and remove them from their position in student government, that is unlawful harassment discrimination, even if they themselves are not a Zionist, right? They just have to recognize that discriminating against a Jew on the basis of any part of his or her identity is unlawful harassment and discrimination. That's the thing about anti-Zionism. If you're going to marginalize somebody on that basis of that part of their Jewish identity, that's wrong. Especially at a time where what society is demanding is that we should be welcoming every individual, right? First of all, every individual has a right to define for themselves what their identity is. And no matter how radical that identity may seem to us, they are welcome to have a seat at our table with their full identity. If that's our society today, it is outrageous to suggest that the only community that's not welcome at our table are the Jews, who must first shed the Zionist part of the Jewish identity.
Thank you.
Let me just add,
Any-
sorry, one more thing
ahead,
again, just a practical thing to sort of cut through the ideological divide there. Listen, in countries around the world, since the most recent outbreak of violence, anti-Semitic attacks have shot up over 400%. During the last war in Gaza, this is not surprising. there was a predictable 400% increase in anti-Semitic incidents. If you're concerned that, for example, saying the coronavirus came from China might lead to anti-Asian violence in America, and that's a real concern, but you think calling Israel a genocidal, racist, apartheid, murderous state won't lead to anti-Jewish violence, you might be anti-Semitic. And so I think
Right.
that that's just a sort of a practical approach you can take.
I also want to add one thing. We always have our young followers asking this. There are 52 Muslim designated countries in the world, 52. Nobody seems to have any issues with them and their laws. However, the world has an issue with the Jewish state. I want to have everybody throw that question back and ask why.
Thank you. One thing I've been wanting to say is that the experiences at the 3 campuses where we've had resolutions that call themselves resolutions for the Palestinian people, but in reality are resolutions against the state of Israel, they don't come from people who are reasonable. And a lot of the things that we're saying here are statements that lead us to believe if you only had this conversation or explain to them that if you do this, then it means you're anti-Semitic. It doesn't hold water. Last night when we were discussing how the resolution was anti-Semitic, they kept saying, but there's nothing religious here. And we kept repeating why doing what they were doing and saying what they were saying can lead to anti-Semitic attacks or problems for the Jewish students on campus. It is not that we don't know what needs to be said or the connections between the resolutions and anti-Semitism. It's that because in principle, they're presenting the Palestinian people as the oppressed people, as the victims. And young people are so much into social justice, it is very hard to get through people with reason. And we Jewish people, and I find this, I've been doing this for more than 10 years, we believe that using reason works. And we Jewish people tend to be very intellectual and like to put things in a way that makes sense. The people who are coming at us have been raised with lots of passion against us. They're not using thought or reason. They're using the passion they have against us. And so you're talking about trying to reason with somebody who's not interested in reasoning with you. They're just interested in going after you. And this is a challenge we're finding at all of our campuses, from the faculty, what's happening in behind the closed doors, what's happening in the quad, and what's happening right now on social media. And the perfect example is that we introduced the IHRA definition at all but one of our campuses. Really, it hasn't worked out for us up until now. And the school that adopted the IHRA definition is going to be right now at 2:00 fighting to pass a resolution that is very problematic against the state of Israel. So I think in speaking for the students for the work we do at our Hillel, I find it to be, I think there's got to be something else. There's got to be a way that we could, everything that you've said is true. Everything that you've said makes sense. But how do we make a shift? How do we change the tide that is currently happening in our college campuses, where it's every day more, not every day less? And even though all the efforts that all these organizations are doing, I always say it's like killing roaches. You kill 2 and 7 appear on the next counter.
Can I step in for a sec?
Yeah, I just want to.
So you said, what do you do? It's like whack-a-mole, right? So
Yes,
we found
yes.
something very effective. When you name and shame bigots, they retract a lot of the time. So UCLA held a BDS vote at midnight about a month and a half ago to 2 months ago. My time frame is a little sketchy. 3 months ago, maybe. We identified every single senator, 12 of them, that voted yes in this ridiculously quiet middle of the night meeting. They involved none of the Jewish organizations on campus. We featured them on social media. They instantaneously got a hold of it. Within 48 hours, the vote was retracted and shelved. So I cannot stress this enough. You have to out the bigots. If there was an anti-Black or anti-Asian incident on campus, that person or people's names would be all over social media, if not picked up by the mainstream press. So I cannot stress this enough. You have to publicize who these student senators are. You have to publicize, I'm sorry, I forget the young woman's name who was speaking so passionately. It's amazing.
Valerie.
I'm sorry?
Valerie.
Yes, Valerie, where this administrator that's supposed to be in charge of equity at the university was essentially blowing them off. This is when we want students to contact us. We have such a foothold on social media. We would put we would tweet out or tweet at them asking, why are you ignoring your Jewish students? Anti-Semitism is skyrocketing. You missed a meeting, you missed 3 meetings, you're ignoring 7 emails. Your Jewish students matter. So this is a perfect time when us Jews need to use social media in our favor. We need to be proactive. We don't just need to use social media to be defensive and say, no, we're not baby killers. No, we're not, bombing civilians in Gaza. So we have to be proactive in terms of fighting anti-Semitism and get on that racial horizontal hierarchy where we're equal with other minority groups. We're not below Blacks, Asians, Muslims. We're equal to them. We just have to make sure that we're fighting correctly.
One thing I want to say, first of all, our Jewish students, and I said this when I opened the presentation, are afraid. They don't necessarily want to speak up. They don't even want to let their roommates or their peers know where they stand because they know what's going to happen to them. And in some cases, they have been ostracized already. So that's one thing. So we respect the students' privacy, and if they don't want to pursue something, we're very respectful. The other thing is that you need to be very careful with administrators. And for us, it's very important. We have a relationship with campuses and with administrators that are very precious to us. And so we need to learn how to dance with them. Because if we go on an attack mode, so to speak, it's going to backfire. And I know this because I've learned from my peers. So we're very, very careful how we try to develop those relationships farther and how we try to explain to them why what's happened is problematic, which is what we've been trying to do certainly in the past few weeks. So I think there are circumstances where that would merit for somebody to be, placed in a social media platform of sorts. But I think, and the other thing is we are already working with organizations that are helping us with the advocacy, with the legal matters. So it's a lot of coordination and respect for the students and respect for the relationships we have built on those campuses that we want to pursue farther, and that we know that we need to educate those administrators as to why this is so damaging to the Jewish students without risking our relationships with them. So it is not so, we are the ones who are going to end up in campuses. So I always say for organizations who want to come into our campuses, we're the ones who are left to deal with
so
the feelings that are left behind. And I want to overstress this because it's very, very delicate. So
Sarita, in response to that, I want to say that first of all, it's important for students to know when you talk about legal initiatives, there is a long path, right, between a student who gets ostracized and who's pushed out of whatever it is and denied essentially that equal educational opportunity on the basis of their Jewish identity, and some big public, federal lawsuit. And the goal, as you say, is to try and get the university administrators to understand and recognize what is happening as that unlawful harassment and discrimination, so that they will take the steps necessary to address that marginalization and that ostracizing of that student or of the community, right, long before there's any need for any legal action. The unfortunate thing that we've seen is that oftentimes universities really are not willing to take the steps that they have to take to seriously address it. And that what happens is the law is a very powerful motivational tool. But that said, you don't have to go the route of some major public federal lawsuit, right? There are complaints, I can tell you, that have been filed against universities with the Department of Education where students have remained anonymous. They've been Jane and John Does, right? Where the issue has been raised with the purpose not of slamming the university in the media, because those complaints don't get publicized, right? The purpose is to try and get the university to then negotiate those resolution agreements with OCR that will get the university to say, okay, we'll adopt IHRA, we'll incorporate IHRA into our own anti-discrimination policies. We'll make sure that we have training that goes on anti-Semitism. We'll make sure that we open up a real path of communication so that students who are feeling this type of anti-Semitic harassment and discrimination are able to convey that to the university, right? We will issue a statement recognizing that for many students, Zionism is an integral part of their Jewish identity, right? We'll do each of those things. That's the goal. The goal is to get the university to come to the table. And sometimes that pressure from OCR is what it takes to get them to do that. And you can do that without it being public and without it, but that's the additional leverage that you need to motivate and inspire the universities to actually take the steps they need to take to address it.
Thank you. I see that the time is 1:30, and unless any of our guests or students have a question, I want to thank our panelists. I could continue this conversation for hours because it's such a difficult, because we're dealing with such difficult times in our campuses. And honestly, being a college student today, a Jewish college student today is very, very difficult. So I want to thank all of you for what you do. We have to go into a meeting at one of our campuses, as I said, where a resolution is going to be hopefully tabled or thrown out, but could get voted in. And we attend those meetings with our students to support them. So I want to thank everybody again, and let's hope that we can turn the tide. Let's hope that we can stop hate. I don't know what else to say. We can't stop doing what we're doing, but it's certainly exhausting. And what kind of future are we leaving for our generations to come? So I want to thank all of you, and I guess we'll see you again in some capacity. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks and good luck.
Thanks. Best of luck to you guys.
Thank you so much.